This is Melissa. It is Real History, and today is Thursday, the 19th of December, creeping up on Christmas for those who observe it. And I am talking today with Kelly, who is in Canada. We'll just have a nameless place in Canada. And I spoke with her father a couple, 3 months ago. I don't remember the title of that one, but he's great. Your dad's great. So
He is great, yeah.
So how are you?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, really enjoying wintertime, although it's actually quite warm where I am, surprisingly. So hopefully we'll still get a white Christmas yet, but could use some more snow, especially because we are into skiing. So
Yeah.
it's hard to ski without snow, but it's been a lovely winter so far.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit. We've only spoken once before. Your father has told me all about you. So, but I wanted to talk a little bit about something that was so interesting to me, and that was the career that you've kind of stepped away from.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that it was interesting is because, okay, so when I talked to your dad, we talked about his career for years in the oil business, oil fields as an engineer. And whenever I think about that, that's what I think of. You know, you're out there, you got a rig and you're drilling. My uncle was in the North Sea as a foreman on drilling rigs. So that's what's in my mind when I think of it. And here I've got a childhood friend whose daughter is in that business, but she's also out there in the field. She's in safety, so she's always going around making sure that the crews are safe and everything is up to snuff. So when you were telling me what you had done, and we don't need to get into too much detail, but I just couldn't even follow along with it. And then, I mean, it didn't compute. And then I realized, oh, this is like trading, like the stock market or something. So I never had any idea. And so if you want to just give a little introduction into what you did and how you ended up there. And
yeah, well, it's trading, but a lot like the stock markets, but dealing with physical products. So oil and gas, everyone knows the supply side of getting it out of the ground, and the end product where people are putting it in their car. But there's actually a huge industry of getting the products from point A to point B. And there's different arbitrage opportunities where, okay, one location has really cheap oil or cheap products, and then there's a market somewhere down the line, down the pipe or down a train, where the prices are higher. And so there's a gain to be made between taking that cheap product, pulling it down the pipe, and selling it at that higher market. And so there's a whole world there of getting your supply and then getting your where you're going to send it to. So whether you have a refinery that you're feeding, or maybe you're just feeding into another market that you're not necessarily associated with that refinery, but yeah, there's a whole world of millions and millions of barrels and cubic meters and BTUs of energy flying all over the place. And I got to kind of see that firsthand. Very luckily, like, I grew up thinking that I'd go into oil and gas, and I didn't really know what I'd be doing. But my dad obviously was in oil and gas, and being raised in Alberta, that's just kind of the expectation of, yeah, of course you would go into energy. And so I was studying energy in school, and I just happened to have been given an opportunity to do an internship, in which I happened to land the internship. I didn't even know this whole world really existed for me until I did it, and I found out that, wow, there's a whole, when you go into university, before you choose a career, it's like, oh, do you want to be a doctor or a teacher or whichever? They don't tell you, like, hey, you can be an oil scheduler and actually be responsible for planning and moving large quantities of energy and oil around the continent, which maybe doesn't excite a lot of people, but it is very exciting. It's real product in real time, and all of a sudden, a refinery gets shut down and you have to redirect oil to a cavern or sell it, in a pinch. And then there's the whole risk factor of like, okay, well, how much before I was in the oil scheduling world, I was in the risk management world where, okay, how much product do we want to take on? Because then if you take on too much, you're not able to sell it, or, the arbitrage changes and all of a sudden you're sitting on this product that you can't get rid of, and you can start to lose money. So there's the whole financial side of it where you're kind of the middleman between the front office of the traders that are actually doing the buying and selling, and then the management of the company of like, where do we actually want this to go? How do we want to grow the company? Where are the opportunities? And then seeing, okay, did our plans work out? How did the finances turn out for, this quarter versus last quarter? And you end up in some interesting pickles between, the traders versus the management. And you think that everything's all the same, but the expectation from the top versus on the ground can sometimes be a little different, and being the middleman can sometimes have its interesting challenges. But I learned a ton, and definitely a very interesting industry to be a part of, for sure.
Interesting. Well, another thing that really fascinated me was, and we're not going to talk about who you worked for or get into too many details because there's, agreements and so forth. So we'll keep all that to the side. But one thing that was interesting was when you talked about the very big difference between the people who work in gas and the people who work in oil. And that just fascinated me. You said it was like two different companies. It's two different mentalities. So if you want to talk about that.
That was bizarre for me as well, because after I did my internship on the oil side, I actually got my full-time position on the gas side. And I was just excited to have a job at that point. And so, okay, you end up in this new group, and the dynamics are a little different. Like, everyone's very serious, very by the book. There's not as much joking around, which was fine. It was, the way that they had their system set up were actually much better organized in my mind. But it's also easier because in gas, you just have one product. You just have a BTU of energy, and you sell here, you buy here. There's no transporting, really. Like, everything in the pipe. You don't have to wait for things to get to where they need to go. So a little bit easier there. But I'd always wanted to go back to the oil side because that's kind of where the bigger personalities were. And I didn't really understand why in the beginning, but I did make my way back into oil. And I found out that, all the systems that they were using seemed to be kind of archaic compared to gas. I was like, wow, it's like we're 10 years behind. And then the personalities as well, because they deal with such bigger numbers, that's kind of more Wild West kind of world where, the rules that everyone followed very strictly as far as like maybe behavior, you could say, didn't really apply in oil, which kind of suited me, where everything was a little bit more free and jokey. And but it was helpful in that, I could take what I learned from gas of like very, high level, organized, learned so much about, even just my Excel skills, computer skills, and I was able to bring that to the oil side and rebuild things and make things more efficient, and be able to produce information that's actually beneficial to the business, which, you don't think you can do a whole lot when you're fresh into an industry, but a little bit of the right timed information or clear information when you're dealing with tens of millions or hundreds of millions sometimes of dollars, it can really make all the difference. So I really enjoyed the switch back. But the strangest thing is that they were like oil and water. It's like you'd be on the same floor and you didn't talk to each other. It was like as if we were two separate companies, which in reality it was run as two separate companies. But the personalities that it drew from one side to the other were so different that there was really not a whole lot of overlap between the two groups, which was kind of sad for me, because when I left my group in gas, I was like, don't worry guys, like I'm just literally down the hall. I'll see you guys all the time. And the weird reality is it would turn out as I got like engulfed into this new culture, and it was so different from the old culture. And it's like, it really was like leaving the company. It was like going to a new company. It was very bizarre. Yeah.
The way that you described it made me think, well, you said the money, the big money is in oil. And so you're saying there that oil was 10 years behind in terms of how they did things, the business approach and so forth. So it made me think that they're raking in the bucks for the company. They're cowboys. They're like cowboys. They don't want anybody bossing over them, and they're going to call the shots, and they don't really want to bring the system up to date because it's boring and too kind of like
well, I just
efficient in business.
It's necessary. They're like, we're making lots of money, and honestly, the systems themselves, like from my perspective, from the risk perspective, I could tell it's like, okay, there's definitely some improvements being made, but on the trading side, they don't see any of those systems. They're just working on their trader platforms and calling deals and do what they need to do. They have no idea that there's maybe even better ways to do things. But because I'd kind of seen the gas side, I'd done some revamping over there on our exposure reports, then I was able to be like, okay, I think I have some ideas of how to change things. And it was also a surprise as well. Like, okay, when you live in the gas world where every unit is interchangeable, and then you come to the oil world where it's like, oh, now we've got heavy versus light, and each one of those buckets has like 15 different products, and they all come from different areas, but they also have a different viscosity, or sour versus not sour. And some refineries like it for this reason, another refinery likes it for if you like crude, you like to make heavy crude. If you want to make the asphalt products, heavier products, if you're going for like the really light stuff, you're maybe making more gasoline. So there was so much more to learn, and it was so dynamic, which made me think you needed this kind of organization even more. And I wouldn't say that I made much of a dent at all, but it definitely through my career, when I was learning through each step of, like, I started off in the diluent, went over to the crude, heavier crude, and then crude by rail versus crude by truck and crude by pipe. I was kind of able to add my little tweaks here and there and automate where I could, which I really enjoyed doing, because when you are able to take something that takes you a long time, and it might take you a really long time to automate it, but when you get to push the button and it does all of the copy pasting and filling out the formulas for you, and you get that answer, it's very, very satisfying. But I also learned that not everyone actually wants that. Like, the company would be like, yes, we want efficiency, we need to optimize. And then it's like, you bring optimization to the table and people are like, whoa, well, you're going to put me out of a job here. And all of a sudden things aren't put into action. And and I think a lot of that is just dependent on the players at the time at the table. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily par for the course of all the businesses, or I don't know, but it was definitely interesting to navigate the jungle of corporate life, especially when you haven't been exposed to it before, and you're just in mostly just as is world, where it's like you're authentic and you say what you mean what you say, and then you come into business world and it's like, oh wait, there are politics involved, there's powers involved, there's egos and insecurities and all sorts of things that when you're new to the table, you just think, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to play those games. But if you don't play the game, then the game ends up playing you. So you, at some point, have to start to strategize even to that level of like, okay, I have this thing I want to accomplish, but I'm dealing with this particular personality type, which means you need to approach it in a way that might not be obvious to someone that doesn't understand the dynamics. So
you said that when you first started out, you were lucky to get someone who mentored you, and you had said to him, you were just being yourself, authentic, and saying it as you saw it. And he said, you can't say that. And you said, well, why not? And he said, Well, you said it's true, and he said, yeah, but you can't say it. So.
Yeah, that was the first surprise for me, and I was very lucky to have this mentor because it was an unlikely connection of somebody who's actually in a very high position, and I was very fresh to the company. But I think the way that I maybe expressed myself, or the fact that I wasn't necessarily afraid or of the difference in rank, where I would just like, hey, this is the thing and we need to deal with it. And they're like, who is this young nobody talking to me? And so it kind of took me on as like, okay, not in any like major way, but we'd go for coffees or go for lunch, and I would explain my predicament or what I think should happen, and I would be very blunt in what maybe who's doing what or whatever's going on. He's like, you can't say that, and it's like, but this is what's going on. It's like, I know, but Kelly, you're new to the world of corporate. You can't do that. You have to. And I learned that eventually you have to kind of massage how you say things in order to maybe be a little bit more PC. But as you know, with growing up with my dad, PC wasn't really in my repertoire very well.
Well, you said a couple of funny things that maybe we can touch on here. And I'll start with saying that you said you were pretty young. If you want to share that age or not, you can, but you were pretty young when your father all of a sudden says, oh, well, the way the world works is totally different than so he was off down all these different avenues of exploration and very excited and kind of, I don't know what the word would be to describe it, but kind of like, we got to change everything. And, this changes everything kind of approach. And you found that very impactful because of your young age.
Definitely. I mean, I still have never met anyone of my age who's seen the world from the age that I have. I mean, I'm sure you probably have listeners that from all age groups. I don't know, but yeah, I would still love to meet one who's not even much older than me usually. But yeah, I would say even earlier from when we talked, like, he was about truth, and like even within our family dynamic, right? We had the very religious side, and then we had the logical atheist side, and so it was like there was always a kind of like, okay, the brainwashed versus the reality. Obviously, maybe in a little more softer terms than that, but it was always like, okay, yeah, this is what they believe, and this is how the world really is. And then, down the road from there, waking up again and being like, okay, not only is there like, okay, there's the brainwashed religious side, and then there's the world that we know it, and then it's like, oh wait, the world that we know it is also the brainwashed side, right? And so that was really interesting because I've always had one foot in the, okay, there's how the outside world thinks, and then there's the reality of it. And of course, it's like being the only person that I knew that had this information. I had to live in kind of two separate worlds, right? So it's like, okay, we can speak truth and be authentic in the house and when we're talking, and then you go out to the outside world, you go to school, you go to sports games, and it's like, I can't say any of this stuff, right? And so yeah, it was very interesting kind of having these two worlds to live in, which was totally fine, really, until COVID. And then it became those two worlds collided. It could no longer be like, okay, I can be my normie self and then I have my like truth self. Now it's like, okay, the realities are hitting where it's like the theory of how the world works, how the big boys run their game, and even the chemtrails, whatever. It's like all of that stuff could be kind of compartmentalized. And now it was like, okay, now there's actually a fork in the road. There's no more parallel, like hopping one foot on each side. It's like you had to really have some courage, really, and be like, okay, like I definitely did not have the courage that my dad had, for sure, of just like saying what he meant all the time to anyone, as you know. But then it's like, okay, it comes down to, are you going to wear the mask, or are you going to, have the tough conversation with the friends that are heavily brainwashed? And it was a tough time for sure. But it couldn't have worked out better. Like, honestly, it was, and I hate to say it because it was a horrible thing for most people, but it has drastically improved my life as far as like, okay, you shed the people you need to shed, and you made the moves that would not necessarily, it was a catalyst, right? So all of a sudden it's like you're working from home. So you start to learn this kind of like freedom of like, oh, I'm not locked in the office and I can work from this place or that place. And you start to learn like, hey, I don't know if I can give up this feeling of being free. And then it's like you start to make different moves. Like, well, do I even want to live in this city? Do I want to be in this city life? It's like, what do I really want? And then you start to draw people in, pardon me, that are on the same wavelength. And yeah, a whole different world opens up. And surprisingly, like a lot of the world started to, you know, quote unquote, wake up and start to see things. And so it went from, you know, a very small handful of people to all of a sudden, like many people starting to know some of the things or notice some of the things that, you know, I'd kind of taken for granted my whole life just by the nature of being raised with a dad that was awake, right? So in the end, it's like, okay, I'm in this world that, yes, it still has a lot of dark, but I'm in like one of the brightest parts of my life that I could ever hope for. So it's worked out well.
Well, there's a couple of things about your story that probably situated you to be able to make the right choices at the fork in the road. And one of them, you were telling me that when you were in school pretty young, not yet at university, I don't know if it was a friend or some friends that you had, but you said that because of your father's work and his loves for traveling and seeing the world and so forth, that you just kind of thought that everybody had seen everything that you had since you were 3 years old and had been all these places. And then you get to be a little bit older and see, oh no, you know, nobody that I know, none of my classmates have had these experiences at all. Then you start to see, oh, my dad is very different from other fathers. And I've had this whole range of experiences. And then I won't put you too much on this spot about how you kind of came to the fork in the road about travel versus university, but that was an earlier kind of place where you changed it up a little bit, but you love to travel. And you've been a lot of places. I was impressed with how much of the world that you've seen. So you've been a lot of places, and it allowed you, I think, I'm just guessing, but during to have that background that you could draw from when you were faced with choices and say that, you know, I know that things can be very different. I don't have to be in the corporate world around people who are believing all of this. I can do different things in my life. And the travel is really interesting. So if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Having the background is definitely, you don't really realize that your programming is different sometimes until later in life when you look back and see like, wow, okay, this is actually a very unique experience that not all kids get to get. And yeah, I was very lucky to have a father that actually took us traveling to, you know, really amazing parts of the world. And when you're a little kid, you don't really understand. It's like your reality is your reality, and it just is what is. You've got your caregivers that are just like, this is what we do now, and you're just like, yes, okay. And so yeah, recently returning to one of those places with some friends of mine and just seeing just how much of the change, you know, from, you know, sailing without autopilot, without having touch screen you know, devices and automatic winches that you just push the button and the sail goes up, and having a crew and captains and all that, and then seeing back like, wow, okay, we did this without all that, and it was just, you know, a dad and his 2 kids and a Cocker Spaniel puppy just going around these islands and doing the thing, and we just experienced that as like, yeah, of course I can, you know, swim to the shore by myself with my snorkel and my little brother, and we're going to go collect hermit crabs and chase goats all day, or whatever it is that we liked to do. And then, you know, you come back to reality or back to Canada, and it's like, you know, a lot of kids did not get to have that. They had maybe the helicopter parents, or they, you know, I had a friend of mine that had never been like 2 hours out of the city her entire life. And so it's just like, yeah, you realize that those experiences at the time really shrunk the world down. And so it's like, of course, like, I'm going to go to this place and to that place. And it was just a matter of booking the flight. There was no the fear of travel potentially. I don't know. I've never really had that because I've always experienced the world kind of shrunk down. But you're right, having that kind of base, having that programming in the brain of like, okay, I have the ability to go wherever I want to go. I just have to make it so. Come down to time, and it's like, okay, you know, there's time. It needs to be a change, and I'm used to kind of being in the driver's seat, the captain of where I want to go. And so making a big change probably wasn't as foreign to me as maybe it could be for a lot of people. You're right.
So one of the big outcomes of the last few years was the realization that you may not really want to go back into the corporate world, that it is possible to live life without that and have a lot more freedom, and you're enjoying a more rural, slower pace.
I definitely don't regret going into like doing the job that I did, meeting the people that I did, being under the pressure that I was to perform, where it's like, okay, you've got, you know, however many $1 million of product on the line, and if you make a mistake and you reroute wrong or you do whatever, it's like that's real dollars, and people are expecting you to, you know, be there at 5 a.m. or not always 5 a.m. but, you know, early in the morning, and you've got the alarm clock going, and you've got the routine that you're expected to be in. And not only that, but it's like the environment that you're in is not, you know, beautiful organic meadows where we're picking berries, like our brains and bodies are designed to be. It's like I'm under fluorescent lights, packed in under like an intense load of, you know, electromagnetic radiation, right? Where it's like you've got the giant computer screens everywhere, and the you know, the computer room and all the lights coming down. It's like it's not a healthy environment. And then you also have, okay, everyone's bringing in the donuts and they're bringing in treats, and it's always like, oh, it's a good time. Like let's especially during the more social years where I was more front facing, it's like you got to go out with customers and you got to drink and you got to party, and that's kind of the thing. So it's like you're kind of forced to be in this environment that is really not good for long-term health, long-term mental health. And, you know, being raised in a way where it's like, okay, we value our health. It's like right from a young age, it's like dad was already teaching us how to be hackers, essentially. Like, okay, we've got a math test coming up. Like, let's get the ginkgo going. Let's get this going. And so, yeah, I really, really value that training and that wisdom at that age, because I could tell, even though I was in this environment, it's like, I don't want this to be a long-term thing. And before I went into oil and gas, that was always my mindset. It was that this was a means to an end. It's like when you get in, get the capital I need so that I can get out. But once you get in, the golden handcuffs are a real thing. It's like I could leave, but they are paying me well enough that, you know, it seems like too big of a risk or too much of a, you almost feel guilty, because a lot of people that would kill to be in your position, it's like, oh, wow, you made it into this company. Like, that's like the be all end all. And, you know, you feel like, yeah, I guess I should be grateful. And so you kind of get into these weird mind games of like, you want to stay for various different reasons, but you know it's really not good for your health. And then boom, comes, and it kind of breaks that cycle, right? So it's like, okay, all of a sudden now I'm working in an environment, you know, I'm still staring at a screen 8 hours a day, but, you know, I'm doing it not under a bunch of fluorescent lights. In fact, sometimes I'm working and, I'm outside and I'm enjoying the beautiful view, and a chicken, pops up and wants a piece of food. And you're like, oh, this is like a really nice way to work. But aside from the environmental factors, there's also the mental battle of having to go to work with the normies. I don't mean for that to sound like I don't mean to be aggressive, because, it's not their fault. They are programmed the way that they're programmed. Everyone's just trying to do their best. But when you have to go to work and pretend 8 hours a day that you're a normie, and then, they have the big news screens up on the wall, and certain commercials will come on, or certain news will come on, and it's like, I can just be like, oh, another psyop. Meanwhile, the normies are like, oh, did you hear this and this and this? And it's like, I did hear that. Yes. And you can't be like, that's not real. Which is funny, because I did do that for a little while. I'm like, I think they nicknamed me Dark Star for a little while, because I had a bit of an outlook of how things would go, that they're like, oh, you're so negative. It's like, I'm not trying to be negative. It's like Allan, he was not negative. He was just saying what is, right? But yeah, I forget where I was going with that. But yeah, that's kind of
straddling the world with the normies and kind of putting that face on, and the strain of it. Yeah.
The strain of it. So there was the environmental factor, and then there's the mental factor, and then, the COVID kind of breaking that chain and being outside of that, being able to spend my time, also the commuting. It's like the amount of time that corporate life takes out of you. It's not just your 8 hours a day. It's you wake up and you have to become, very put together, because you're in a corporate world, and then you have to commute. And then at the end of the day, you have to commute back. And so it's like the amount of time it takes back just sucks a lot of your energy and a lot of your time to think. And so you do end up in these cycles where it's like you start to just become an NPC, so to speak, where it's like you're just running the program, and you don't have the time to speak, to think, which is, by design. But once you do, it's hard to unsee. And so once I was back into the corporate world, I knew that, okay, I need to get into a place where I have more flexibility. And so that's what I did when I changed jobs. I'm like, okay, getting into a place where there's more work from home. And then when that job ended, and I actually had some time to reset, you don't even realize that your nervous system is up here. You're strung here all the time, and that's on your new normal, right? And so you think that's normal until you actually relax, and you're like, oh, this is good. And then you think, I don't want to go back into that world again. Like, can I make this work? And, after being in that world for 10 years or so, it's like, okay, I'm not going to be desolate if I don't go back tomorrow. So maybe I do take some time to think about how I want to be. And the longer I've been out of it, the more it's like, okay, that's not a good environment. I don't want to be, doing safety moments or getting written up for not holding the handrail, or, having to pretend every single day, I think is actually the hardest thing. So it's like, I want to live authentically for the rest of my life. I don't think I want to compromise on that anymore. I did the thing. I think I'm good on that.
Oh, that's a big place to get to. Authentic for the rest of my life. Well, that's great. Well, you mentioned, and we don't have to say where that is, but that you're in an area where you're with, there's a mix of people, but let's say there's some young people, but the vibe is that there are a lot of people there who have varying degrees of awareness that the world is maybe not all it's painted to be officially. And you're around people in a sense of community that are trying to make their own little area better and more self-reliant, and maybe that's a way of putting it. That and that, yeah.
I've been very lucky to find where I am now, for sure. And originally the initial leap was just to get to the physical location of like, okay, I'm outside of the city. I'm in a place that is beautiful and has a lot going for it, is has a vibrancy to it. But the best part was, we show up on the first day and honk honk, neighbors like, hey, are you the new neighbors? And it's like, yeah. It's like, and it's like, yeah, we did it. Because it's like, you're in the city and your neighbors are like, you're in my parking spot, or the mentality in the city versus like coming out here was like literally within day one, it was just like, yep, this was the move for sure. And it's really nice to be around, like when you're in this area that's a little bit rural, everyone has to be self-reliant. So you don't get any of those victim mentality, pity parties, whatever that you get in the city. And not that everyone is like that, but a lot of people are. And that's like the programming that is being put out, is that you're a victim, and it's the victim Olympics, and the more victim you are, the more points you get. That does not apply up here. You do not get to do that out here. It's like, yeah, there's big snowfalls. You have to be able to manage, potentially heating your house if the power goes out, which it does on a semi-regular basis, as it would turn out. And then, everyone has enough space that they can do things like grow big gardens and have some chickens. And that's been huge. I love having a garden. I was listening to your last conversation with Prince, and he was talking about his cantaloupes that he'd grown. And I was just like, the cantaloupes, because that was one thing that I had tried to grow last year. And, my zucchinis went crazy, and pumpkins were off the chain. But the one thing that didn't come up for me was the cantaloupe. So when I heard him talk about how good those fresh cantaloupes were, yeah, somebody that really gets it. But it's true, when you grow your own food, it doesn't taste like the grocery store. It's got a life to it that is, you can taste it. You can taste that this thing is alive. Whereas sometimes you get stuff from the grocery store, and especially you go to like a Costco or something, and you're like, wow, this thing's been in the fridge for 3 months and it looks exactly the same. I don't know how it looks exactly the same, but it does. So yeah, being able to have control over what you put in your body, especially now where it's like, okay, it's very obvious how the system works with like the poisons and the traps and whatever. It's like, you can't avoid them all. They're spraying God knows what in the sky. They're spraying stuff on the food. You're going to encounter toxins, whether it's people or whether it's environmental. You're going to have that. And so you can only worry about what you can control. And for me, it's really important to be able to control the food that you put in, because that helps cleanse. You can really face all those other things when you've got kind of a good base. Your nutrients are high, your vitamin D is up, you're feeling vibrant. Then when all these other things come down, or even just, the latest psyop, you're not like, oh, the aliens are here. Apparently, I don't know, that seems to be the latest one, but or the Iranian drones or whatever they're going to throw at you, and everyone's all like, oh my god, this is the end of the world. You're just like, I'm going to go feed the chickens, whatever.
The drone psyop, yeah.
Oh man, it's a good one. I knew they were coming, but I didn't. I guess that's just the timing between the election or whatever they've got to ramp things up.
Well, I want to come back to the people that you're around, but the one thing that's going on up there that I haven't had a chance to investigate at all, but it looks like, okay, Trudeau's out, right? That this is it.
It would appear so, but I also haven't dove in too much because politics is mostly just a show, and I don't give it any amount of attention other than that it's just entertainment for the masses. And to keep people
I like the little puppet show.
So I was like, we know what's going on. It's still fascinating sometimes, nonetheless. Like I don't find myself like, oh, this person's in or this person's out, even though it's totally irrelevant. It's very relevant to the normies. I'll tell you that. They come all very excited, especially if they know that you're even slightly political. Anything that happens into politics, which they know that I'm, most people know I'm pretty anti-government in general. And so whenever anything interesting happens, they're just like, yeah, Kelly, yeah, Trudeau's out. It's like, no, he's evil. It doesn't matter.
Business as usual.
Yeah.
But you said that you're around a lot of people who besides the self-sufficiency and, just kind of taking control of what you can, are really questioning a lot, not getting stuck on politics, but saying, for instance, why did this happen the way that it did? I mean, do you have a sense that people are staying awake, or, the ones, or no?
Yeah. I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, when things start to get more normalized, I've definitely seen people kind of go back into the sleep of like, and I have to say, even myself included, where it's like not a sleep per se, but you're very vigilant when things are serious, where they're like, okay, we're gonna, do something about these unvaccinated people, and you're like, what does that mean? Do I need to be worried here? And then when things kind of start to relax, you're like, okay, I'm not so vigilant of what's going on. But we do have people in our community that are awake-ish, as in they can tell that there's so many levels, and that term can mean so many things. And I would say even I'm not like awake, like compared to an Allan or even probably yourself. It's like there's so much I don't know and so much programming probably to undo. But compared to the average Walmart enjoyer that you would see, there's some pretty good people around in our community that, are aware enough not to take it, understand that there's corruption in the government, and are really starting to get into the nutrition side of things. Like, hey, there's something wrong here, and I need to start to take responsibility for myself and not rely on, the people in the white lab coats to take care of them. It's like, okay, great, they want to eat organic things and grow their own food. And they're always very curious because they know that we have, it takes a bit to even meet someone who's awake and know that you're both awake, because you're like both in normie land and you're both pretending to be normies. And then it's like you say a little thing and you're like, that was weird. Or they say something and then it's like, well, and then you start to like throw these little breadcrumbs out. And then before you know it, you're like, we're the same. You get very excited. But then you realize like, oh, we're not quite the same. Like no one is Allan Watt level, right?
Well, what he used to say, Kelly, is that it's the work of a lifetime. It's like an onion, and you just keep peeling the layers away. It's just constantly, and you cry sometimes because you're like, oh, there's more I didn't know, and it's painful, but it's the work of a lifetime. I mean, I learn all the time, and about myself too, so that's good.
Yes, it is good. And there's definitely layers. I mean, I remember even my dad going through some interesting layers. And there were certain periods of time where, whether it was learning about the trannies or whatever it was, like something that's just so ridiculous. You're like, really? Like that's a thing? And I remember him saying, oh, Kelly, I got another one. It's like, no, it don't be true. And it's like, yeah, this is what it is. And it's like, okay. And then I would research it myself and be like, there's no way, this is too ridiculous. And you're like, yeah, that's definitely part of their religion. And once you see it, you can't unsee some of these actors, especially when it's like, yeah, they're supposed to be the pinnacle of feminine beauty, and you're like, that's not even a woman. Oh my god. So there's layers all the time. I'm sure there's so many. I've had less of the like, oh no, not another like reality shattering layer, but it's more in watching the others kind of shed, and then they come to you with these like, questions and be like, so what do you think about? And you're like, you're at that stage, or you're at that stage. But yeah, well, I've been very.
I've said this before, but Allan has his 3-book set, and he had them available individually. And so years ago, when I first heard him, I'm like, oh wow, this is amazing. Just kind of blew my head open. And then I wanted to get the books, and I looked to see what they were. And the very first one is entitled "The Androgynous Hermaphroditic Agenda," and I just was going, what? What is this? So I ordered book number 2 first. I'm like, okay, I don't know. I have no idea what the guy's talking about here. But it is amazing, really, because it's all around us now. It's just
all around us, everywhere. And it's so funny because it's like, oh, it's so obvious. And then especially having to live amongst a lot of people that are still deep in it. And it's like, so hard sometimes is you want to just be like, ah, but yeah, just to see it it's really fascinating. It's also interesting to see like how your mind actually wakes up, because you actually see it clearly. You see them as clear as day. When before it was like, oh, maybe that's the one, or maybe not one. And now it's just like, okay, you turn something on and there's like a supermodel that is like very obviously not. Meanwhile, they're like, most people are like, wow, this is the most.
Well, it's that, it's that new normal snow, Bertrand Russell, we can teach children that snow is black thing. Women have always had Adam's apples, and they've always had these huge wrists, and really broad shoulders.
Exactly. It's amazing what they can do just and in almost no time. Like the television itself has been such a crazy tool, where even now with the stuff, it's like, oh yeah, of course children have always had. It's like, yes, you can't have like, and it's funny because
come on, Kelly. Now, when you were in grade school, didn't you have 2 or 3 classmates?
Oh yeah, no, it's wild though. It's like you can see it. You can see the programming, and then you see it reflect out of everyone. Like almost the next day, it's like whatever the programming is. It was very fascinating. It was actually, I think, somewhat enjoyable in the way that, okay, I'm fascinated by all these topics. I'm fascinated by, crowd control and social engineering and mind manipulation, and then being deep in it and being able to watch, like, okay, here's the propaganda, and then you go to work the next day, and then you hear parrots, and then they're just like, oh my goodness, and you try and put little things out, and you try and test, and then like the firewall would come up, of like, oh, we can't go down that road, or they've already got the pre-programmed responses to like certain things that are in there. And you're just like, wow, it's fascinating. They're so good. It's almost you got to hand it to them almost. You're like, that is magical, the way that they can literally magic, I guess.
It really is, and every country, Alan would always say they test things out in different countries. So one place is going to be further ahead in one part of the agenda, or the people's, like I haven't noticed in the U.S., although I don't really go into the city that much. I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the UK, I keep reading about how this little township or area had to put in a new, box, like a public facility that you could open up and get somebody. And it's like, it's a thing now, and they're normalizing it there. I don't know if this is going on in Canada, but one thing I did notice amongst some Canadians is that many of them for years have been on board the let's just accept the gender dysphoria thing. Real and older people too, going, well, of course, if he wants to be a girl, he's a girl, and that's just so hateful of you, not.
Oh man, that's been really great. I think Canada's probably been the worst. Like it's Venezuela for a reason, where it's like it's full up here, and yeah, the double speak, the brainwashing, the men can be women and boys can be girls, just crazy. And I remember like the whole Caitlyn Jenner becomes Woman of the Year, and I remember just being like, this is insane. And I remember being at work saying that, like, before I was able to like, okay, you can't say all the things you want to say, being like just laughing, like watching the television and openly laughing and expecting other people to laugh, be like, this is insane. And you had some people, especially like some of the men, that would kind of be like, yes, this is insane. And then you'd have some of the women be like, no, she's beautiful, and of course she should be Woman of the Year. And it's like, oh my goodness. But that was such a theme. Like I actually spoke up quite a few times about various different things, like especially in regards to the whole feminism, or like women victim Olympics, where it's like, okay, in work they'd have these very special things where it's like, okay, women in the workplace, or we're going to have promotion of this woman and that woman. I'm like, why don't we just have it for everyone? Like, why women do we have some kind of mental disability that we need to have all this special attention? It's the bigotry of low expectations, I think they call it, where it's like, okay, they're doing all these things, but really by their actions, they're implying that you're lesser than the men beside you, and that you actually need all this help. And then, trying to do your job, and you can't just do your job because you're then probably expected to be a diversity hire, especially from you're in the wild west of oil and gas where it's a man's world there, and they're like, okay, woman here. They don't openly say that, but it's like the way that the hiring process went, it was pretty obvious when there was a diversity hire. And so you have to do not just the job, but you have to kill it. You have to be so darn good. And then it's like, oh yeah, you are supposed to be here. So this whole thing where they're trying to make women, I don't know, like give them this special status has actually really hurt women, in my opinion, for sure. It makes it tougher.
Another thing that I've noticed for years, my whole life, is the handicapping it, literally. So we've got to promote women for this. And I think the military is probably a good example, but they can't hike with 50 pounds on their back. They can't lift 100 pounds of this or that. But, well, we're going to promote them into this job that they're absolutely can't do. And that's not bad. It's just,
just this real life, which we don't.
It's reality.
Yeah, exactly. Which, in the corporate world, it can probably fly. It's like, okay, you have some people that are in the positions that they probably shouldn't be, but it's not the end of the world. But what I found absolutely fascinating was I have some friends that are firemen and paramedics, and this is happening in all industries. And it's like you have this tiny lady who's expected to be, helping lift out people that need help. And it's like, okay, you got a guy and you got him paired up with this woman who is probably going to try her best, obviously, but she's still not going to have the strength of someone who's, twice her size with testosterone and has, certain abilities that just don't exist or are limited for women, for sure. So I was really worried about that. And then that also made me feel like, okay, we must become self-sufficient even more, because you don't want to go to the hospitals where you have diversity hires. You don't want, your fireman to show up and it's a diversity hire. It's like you want to have, can do the job. But when you find out that, okay, you can't necessarily rely on some of these institutions that you would think for sure would never be touched by this, ugly hand of equality or whatever they're trying to call it. It's like, yeah, it's tough.
No, that is very true. And nowhere is it more obvious than in medicine, and scary too.
Definitely. Yeah, the medical communism up here is just so bad. I mean, it's not great in the States either, with the way they have the insurance and everything is super expensive. But everyone covets the Canadian free healthcare, and it's like, it's not a place you want to go. First of all, you're going to wait 2 years to get your new hip, and they'll probably offer you a euthanasia before you even get there. Like it's gone pretty bad. It's like, I think the 4th leading cause of death in Canada. I don't know if you can quote me on that one, but it's become extremely high, where it's one of the leading causes of death in Canada is just euthanasia, and 95% white people, which I don't know. There's a whole rabbit hole to go down there as far as what that means or why that's happening. But terrifying to watch and to see.
Well, I mean, we know that it has been used, that it has been taken advantage of by people who simply can't afford to live.
And
and depressed or what. So we know, I mean, when it started, was it 2016, I think?
Around
it was, only if it's an incurable and you're going to die but I mean, obviously we knew that was going to change, and now it's just any old thing. And there have been some very publicized cases. I mean, the one that just killed me was this fellow who ended up using it probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, who needed 24-hour care. And there was a gap in the care so that his health coverage would only pay for, say, 22 hours. But they would not step in for that 2 more hours of round the clock care, and he just couldn't do it. And he even said, I don't want to be a burden on my son and my family and everything. And it's just like, you can't even believe that this is happening, but it is.
Well, and then they openly brag about how much money they're saving.
Yes.
Which is, and it's like, how you saying the quiet part out loud? Like, you can't say this. They're like, oh yeah, it's amazing how many millions of dollars. And I even have like a story close to home of someone who, like my age, used MAID after a very tragic accident, which left them paralyzed from the waist down. And, I was removed enough from the situation that I didn't have all of the details, but it did sound like they were really skimped on what they should have been provided as just normal care. And then it puts them in this position where it's like life becomes harder and harder, and then they hand them this silver magic bullet way out of it. And it seems so enticing because it's like, yeah, you're in this very new world of having to live in this new way, and it's stressful and scary, and they're not giving you the care they need, and then they offer you this. And so instead of getting lifetime care, getting maybe the chairs or the adjustments in the house or whatever it is that might have been paid for or probably is paid for in the past, now they don't have to do any of that. They just like, here, out you go. And the craziest thing was, I wouldn't say that everyone around him was okay with it, but they're like, well, it's his choice. I'm like, no, like we have to do something. But at that point, it was already decided. I wasn't really close enough with that person to have any real influence, but it's like, we can get you the help you need for, these particular medical problems that should have only happened in someone who had been bedridden for years, happening to someone who just happened to. It's like, okay, this isn't right. They're not getting what they need. And so it was sad to watch, watching the propaganda, watching Canada shift more and more, and then having that happen to somebody that, at one point I did know reasonably well, to like, wow, they actually are gone and state sanctioned murder. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Now they're moving that direction. They've introduced the bill in Parliament in the UK, and they've got all the it always starts with the high profile case, the person that's got the incurable this, and they come forward and say, I really want this, but it always turns into being used on people that the state just wants to get rid of, so they can say, hey, look at all the money that we've saved. I mean, the number that Allan mentioned this a few times, and I don't remember the year, but in Ontario, many years ago, let's say at least a decade ago, the budget just for a certain kind of advertising, I don't know if it was print or television or whatever, but it was a certain segment of the advertising budget, was $44 million to tell Ontarians how amazing the healthcare was.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It is wild. And I don't know if you've seen some of those euthanasia commercials of how glorious they make it look, and how like cool you are, and you can celebrate your last party with your friends on your terms, and it's like they've got the nice music and the beaches and the whatever it is that they're doing, and it's like, wow, they're taking something that is so vile and just painting it to be so that the average person's like, yeah, well, maybe I'll do that because it's hip almost now. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's straight out of the movie Soylent Green.
Oh yeah,
it's straight out of that, because that was it. You'd go in when you decided it was time to check out. You'd go in and they'd give you whatever scene that you wanted to look at, if it was a sunset or the Serengeti or the beach or whatever, and then you could have your nice classical music or anything that you wanted to hear, and then boop, that's it, you're done.
Yeah, totally. Was that Soylent Green or was that Brave New World? I can't
Well,
remember.
Brave New World had the same kind of checkout thing. So did
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Logan's Run, they all kind of went up into a poof,
Yeah,
kind of a cloud. But yeah, Brave New World had that as well. And Soylent Green, what was his name? Edward G. Robinson was the character actor in the movie, and he's, kind of down in the chops, and he's like, well, all right, I'm gonna go, and they make life so miserable. So
so miserable. Well, and on purpose. Like I remember, is it Brave New World where they do the programming where they get sickened by nature or something, where they show nature and then they
yeah,
just like
yeah, I think it's Hypnopedia where, they play
yeah,
something over and over and over, and you're repelled, and don't mending is ending, I think, is one. Don't fix it when you can buy something new, and
yeah, exactly.
everyone belongs to everyone, and
Yeah.
nature is repellent, and it's awful.
Mhm.
Ooh.
I always think about that when I'm in like a really nice natural setting and it's like, oh man, like could you imagine not being able to enjoy this because you've been programmed? And the crazy thing is a lot of people don't like nature. Like a lot of
Yes.
people are like, oh, bugs. Whoa. It's like, I don't love bugs, especially mosquitoes, but actually that's a lie. I used to love bugs. I used to have a bug collection where I was like, oh,
Really.
this is like such a cool bug, it's my favorite bug. So yeah, I used to love bugs. But in general, it's like that shouldn't stop you from, going out and camping, kayaking, canoeing, fishing. Like there's so much enjoyable, even just to watch a sunset or, go skiing and be able to like smell the pine. Like there's so much good in nature where everyone's just
Yeah.
in their box, in their apartment, playing their virtual reality games. And it's like, yeah, it's just so surreal, so dystopian.
Hmm. No, I mean, even years ago, I knew people like that who, I mean, forget about camping or going to the beach or anything like that. You couldn't get them to sit outside al fresco at the restaurant. You know, it's like everybody in the group would go, "Oh, look, great, they've got a table outside. I don't want to go outside. Yuck."
Yeah. Oh man, that's tough. You gotta imagine like how much it's taken to like get to a person. I guess maybe not that much. Like all you need to be is trained as a child that that's
Hmm.
gross or beneath you. I think that's a lot of the programming is like, oh, that's beneath me to be outside, or like that's for peasants or for animals or for whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, I have my marble countertops and my whichever. And it's great.
That's very funny. Well, let's see. Oh, health. Back to food and health. I have to give you the update on the DMSO, and then you can tell people what that is. I Okay, so your dad asked me, I said, well, I do get tired, I don't have as much energy as I'd like. This was a while back, and he said, well, do you take vitamin D? I said, yeah. He said, how much do you take? I don't know, what, 1,000, 50,000,
That sounds like him. Yeah.
and you've got to
Absolutely.
take it at the same time, you got to take it with K. And then
Yeah.
he's got, you got to have this and that. It's really good. I've actually started to incorporate some, but he was telling me about DMSO, and I can't remember. I know it is a byproduct of making paper, which sounds kind of yucky, but
Yes. It
it
sounds very
comes,
chemical, like an evil chemical, but
yeah. But you said, and so he said, oh, you got to use it. You've got to use it. You've got to use it. I'm like, no, okay, so now it's just sitting there. And I can
mhm.
hear your dad going, you got to use it. I'm like, no. So we were talking, and I said, well, yeah, he told me. And you said, oh, you've got to use it.
Yeah.
so so I started, and I have to tell you that these two chronic places, one on the shoulder, one in the low back, it's better. I
Yay. That's
swear it's
awesome.
better. No, I mean, I
Yeah.
know it's not in my head. I really know that it is making a difference. So
Mm.
what is it? Tell the story about putting it on the sprained hand and what you saw.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I was introduced to it originally by my dad, obviously, and I was really intrigued for exactly the same reason where it's like this sounds like a harsh chemical. We're not chemical people. We don't
Hmm.
like chemicals. We're natural. But then the more that you read into it, and especially if you read Amanda Vollmer's book, Healing with DMSO, she goes into the whole history and how it was actually suppressed by Big Pharma because it is a very cheap byproduct of making paper. It's essentially free. And I think why it's so good is because it is an incredibly good solvent. And so it's able to penetrate the skin very easily. And it's dimethyl sulfoxide. So you've got the sulfur and you've got the oxygen. And so it is amazing at bringing circulation. It's amazing at penetrating. So if you've got a scar tissue or a chronic issue that's been there for a long time, there's nothing you can take topically, and it takes a lot even to take things internally to really break that down. But having something that is able to bring blood flow to the area and actually break down that scar tissue, it's totally revolutionizes how to be able to heal your body. And so the other thing is that I always make this mistake with this word, anesthesia. I know you know the word, but it's a pain.
Analgesic.
Analgesic.
Yeah.
So it's great for pain relief because it's not like an Advil or a Tylenol that's going to actually cause you liver damage. This is a totally safe product that actually provides you nutrients of sulfur and oxygen and whichever. But it actually blocks the nerve receptor for like 2 or 3 hours. So if you actually have pain, you can use it as a temporary relief. You have to reapply it once in a while. But I read tons about this, and I'd kind of use it on myself here and there. But what was really the most remarkable for me was 2 events. One where my mom had broken her foot. She stepped on a rock funny or whatever it was and broke the side of her foot. And it was ballooned up, but mostly it was just like super bruised, like just red, purple. The whole thing was purple. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try this thing. And then I was like, well, what is it? And you're like, okay, I got to go through the thing of what it is because it sounds so like, it's not a common thing, and it sounds scary. And so I was like, just trust me. And she's gone to the point now where she trusts me with all of my little remedies and plans that I have. And so I put together this 80% DMSO, so 80% DMSO, 20% water, and I put in some magnesium oil as well, because anything that you put on you put in you, and that works for anything, whether it's sunscreen or whichever, you're absorbing those chemicals, so be careful. But in the case of DMSO, you really, really absorb anything that you touch, so you have to be careful, even after handling it, that you're not handling a bunch of motor oil or doing something, because it can actually go into your blood. But anyways, I made this concoction and I put it on her foot, and within a day, it was remarkable how the bruising was almost gone. Like the blood had come in and cleaned up all of that trapped blood that was in her foot. And she said the pain was greatly reduced. Like she was so happy with it. She's like, I'm putting this on all the time. And she took to it without much opposition whatsoever. And then 4 months later, my partner's father had an accident where he broke his hand falling while he was skating. And the doctors insisted that he needed surgery. And so they put some pins in his hand and did whatever needed to be done to get the bones back together. But then the result was a really bad infection. And so his hand was really swollen, really painful. And he was taking T3s, all kinds of like really powerful pain meds, and antibiotics and things, which you never want to take antibiotics. Destroys your gut biome, and then you have to fight through that as well to try and get your health back. But anyways, he's on this concoction of pharmaceuticals, and it's not getting better. And now he's starting to become nauseous from the pain and from the poison of the just taking too many pills. It really hurts your stomach taking that many of those kinds of medicines. And so sometimes when people get to a point where they've reached their wit's end, only then are they open to some of these things. And that happens not just with medicine, but with knowledge and with whatever. It's like, okay, I've had enough. Give me what can you possibly give me as an alternative? And so we went over to his house, made another concoction up, and I massaged it into his hand as lightly as I could, because it was just this big swollen balloon of a hand. I've never seen a hand that looked that, like it was like a cartoon. And we could watch before our eyes, within 3 minutes, the skin start to wrinkle up because the swelling was coming back down, and it shrunk back down to normal size. And it's like, and everyone in the room was like, wow. And even I was like, wow. And they're like, were you expecting this? And I was like, well, I expected it to help, but like, it wasn't. I was also just like amazed. And he said the pain had greatly been diminished. Now, unfortunately, his partner is very pro pharmaceutical, and I had brought some other things where I was like, you need to take this, you should take this. And she's like, nope, that's going to contradict with the pharmaceuticals. And I was like, just throw those pharmaceuticals out. And you can't, when you're not like a figure of authority, it's really hard to get people to that, to take you seriously. And especially when you're young, it's like, okay, you're talking to somebody who's got so much more experience than you, and they're just like, you listen to me, I don't listen to you. And you're just like, yeah, I know, but I know these things. So he ended up healing. It was good, but those were kind of the two main events where I was like, this is real. Like, I believed it. I tried it on myself. It was fine, but I never had a major injury to like really know. So those two events really proved to me that, like, yes, this is fine. And like, I know it's safe. I've drinking it before. I've used it on things. The worst thing is that it makes you smell like a garlic.
Well, it has an odd smell. It really does. It's a kind of an odd, it's just odd. It's a little, yeah. And
you can probably taste it as well, because it's like, you can put it like, rub it into the bottom of your foot, and like 2 minutes later, less than that, it's like, oh, I taste garlic, because it goes in that quickly.
Yeah. But it's funny because your dad sent me Amanda Vollmer's book and a little bottle of DMSO, and I'm like, okay, it's sitting there in the book, and I'm like, oh, just tell me what to do, okay? Because I can't read a book, I can't take the time to do that. And he's like, oh no, it's amazing, it's amazing. So I kind of flip it open, and it got that thing going in me where like, no, because you know how when you read about an herb and it's like, it does this and it does that.
It's a miracle.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh, it's one of those that fixes everything. I forget about it. But then I've used it after I talked to you for a couple of days, and I'm like, it is a miracle.
Yes. Good. I'm so glad.
So then I actually got the book out and I start reading it, and I'm like, okay, all right, I get it now. I understand the hype. And like you said, it's cheap, it's easy to use, but you were saying it's very suppressed,
Very suppressed. Yeah, and you can read that. She kind of lays it out in the book of like how it came to be suppressed, and how there actually was a ton of research done on it. And then when it became, known that, oh, this is actually something really serious and important, then, they put their pharmaceutical spin. They do this study where they make you drink like way too much, and then something happens. Like, oh, sea poison, ban it. And then that's kind of, it was suppressed from there on, because it would be billions of dollars of loss if everyone knew about DMSO. Their industry would be totally crushed. I should probably hide my face now from Big Pharma.
I'll blur you out and change we'll put a filter on your voice so that when, people actually, yeah,
exactly. The other thing I would say about the book is it's intimidating because it's a book, but most of the book is recipes of how you would use it in different situations.
It's also too, I should have grabbed it. It's over there somewhere, but it's also only about that skinny.
It's not a very thick book. No, it's an easy read. And I think it's actually quite an interesting one, because it's down the same, belief system, I guess, that we might share of like, okay, Big Pharma, giant cartel, owns the media, owns everything, and is brainwashing us and suppressing, things that would otherwise be really useful for humanity. So yeah, I don't know. I highly recommend it. I mean, Amanda Vollmer, I met her actually this year.
Oh, great.
In Austin. Yeah, I went to the Confluence event and saw a bunch of speakers down there, was there for the eclipse. But yeah, I was able to meet her and get her to sign a book for my dad. And it's funny because he's very anti-flat earther. and she's very anti-Glober. So I was like, man, it's so good to meet you. And my dad got me into DMSO and all this stuff. I was like, but he is disappointed that you're a flat earther. And she's like, well, it shucks, too bad that he's a baller. She's very fun and witty, and she has some very interesting ideas, and definitely further down the onion than even myself or a lot of people of some of the things that she believes in. But I do believe that she did a really good job on this book, and the research that behind it is sound by the looks of things.
Well, one of the things that I like about it, and one of the things that makes me feel good talking about it, is it's nobody's protocol. It's not some expensive bottle that's going to set you back $100 a month to do these treatments. You just need a very tiny little amount. It's not expensive. You don't need much. I haven't even really been very exacting about it. I have the dropper and I go, I'm like, okay, there's my 80, and then I splash a little water in it and go, that's my 20, and I'm like, okay.
That's totally what I'm the same way. I don't even do that anymore. I just I get out of the shower. Oh, I'm pretty moist. Okay, I'll put some on. I think more water than I put some on if I need to. And I used to have a volleyball shoulder injury as well. A little different than maybe the injury you're dealing with, but I definitely have used it, and I don't need to anymore unless I do something crazy. Like, I don't know, once in a while I get really excited when I'm playing a game and I forget that it's like, oh, I kind of have this weakness here, and you really go for it, and you're like, oh. But then
I told you I had fallen like years ago. I had a bad fall, and I hit it, and it jammed my arm in there, and so it ended up with what they call a frozen shoulder. And when you go to see the doctor with a frozen shoulder, they want to put you on anesthesia and then do this, which is basically like pull it out of the, and I'm like, no. So eventually I couldn't, put my arm over my head, but eventually it loosened up. And then right before the American Thanksgiving, I got very ambitious with trimming hedges outside. And that's all, I was just like, go spend the afternoon raking and cutting and everything. And then like the next day, I'm like, I can't move my arm.
Yeah.
I can't move. And it didn't go down like I thought it should. It didn't feel better. And you're like, do the DMSO. I did. And I'm like, oh, wow. I'm
good. I'm glad you used it, because I'm always so interested to hear people's experiences, because I don't know anyone else that, in real life, I don't know how to say it. It's not everything's real life, but outside of the internet, of anyone that's really, used it successfully, except for what I've done unto my own family pretty much. So I always love hearing other people's experiences with it.
That's cool. Well, listen, I appreciate you talking to me. I think it's really neat that we've had your dad and now you. And I just wanted to say too that I remember years ago he would write to Allan and he would talk about you and his son too, and he'd say, oh yeah, they know what's going on, they're really up to speed, and and so when I was talking to him, I've talked to him actually quite a lot, especially in the last year. And he said, oh, no, she's still really with it.
I am and I'm not. Like, once the veil has kind of been lifted, maybe not everyone, but my dad has definitely not stopped the search for truth. But for me, it's like, I don't need to look into every psyop. I just see it like, oh, psyop, and continue gardening. There's no, I don't listen to all the shows. I have so many people that I enjoy listening to with different perspectives. And, when I have time, I definitely throw it on. But I know I still have like hundreds of hours of Allan that I could still listen to, because, every talk was like 4 hours, and you get through like 3 of it. It was always so good, but the way that he spoke was so gentle and so calming, which was so interesting, because if you really heard what he was saying, it's like, this is terrifying. The world is run by satanic pedophiles, and like, we should be afraid. But it's like, we would listen to Allan before we went to bed. It's like, oh, let's put him in Allan and like soothe and turn, like, just so comforting to listen to him. And then, especially as a kid, where it's like, okay, my dad has awoken. He's got, Alex Jones, and we've got different figures that are of a personality type that are very be afraid, be very afraid. And it's like, gets your nervous system up, and it's like, you don't feel good after. I always felt good after listening to Allan. And I think it was, you know, a kind of a litmus test for me for the rest of my life of like truth, not just in the words, but in how they're trying to make you feel. So if someone's trying to make you feel afraid, you should be very wary of them. If they're saying, literally, I saw on Mike Adams' email, Natural News. My dad loves Natural News. And I get the emails, and it's like, literally the title was "Be Afraid," blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I would not be afraid. No, I'm not doing that. And so it's like, once your nervous system, once you are afraid and your fight or flight has been activated, your frontal lobes, your lobes are gone. You're just an animal. And now you're programmable. You're be able to be influenced much more easily. And so if I know that Allan, like the truth was so nice coming from him, because it was, you're able to actually put it through your frontal lobes, think about it. You weren't in a fear state of fight or flight and just like, I'm afraid, I need to do something. It was like, no, this is a very long history. This is not something that's going to end overnight, not something you can even probably stop. It's something you just need to accept. And then, you know, you learn to live your life within your own control. You don't worry about what's happening over in China, what's happening over in Israel. It's like, it's good to be aware. And I definitely like to keep my finger on the pulse. I don't want to be surprised by another coming down the ropes and it's like, oh shoot, I should have been paying attention to what was coming. But it's so important to not let it affect you. And that's what I've learned, and that's what I really appreciate from Allan of anything, because he has such a wealth of knowledge, such a strength, and like as sweet and kind as he was, or appeared to be, like he was a strong guy. Like he was not messing around, right? But it was the delivery that made it like, okay, this is not someone that's trying to fearmonger me. It's just, this is just what is. And I think you had said it in your last talk with Prince, where it's like, before enlightenment, chop and get water. After enlightenment, chop and get water. And I just love that. And I wouldn't say that I'm enlightened by any stretch of the imagination, but once you have the veil lifted, it's like, the point isn't to just dig forever, because the rabbit holes are endless. You can go down territory.
They really are. They really are. Yeah.
The internet is amazing. If you can think it, it's a conspiracy theory. You can go in. It's like,
that's right.
It'll take you forever. So it's like, okay, it's infinite. So there's almost no point in trying to go down and solve every puzzle that ever was. You just realize, like, okay, there is a veil to be lifted, and you can't change anyone. You have to just like,
you could work on you're the only material. I mean, Allan would say that a lot, is the only material that you have to work with is yourself. The only material that you can be sure of is yourself. But he talked to, a lot of people, and he had a kind of rotating bunch of people that he would talk to very regularly. But he was always talking to people, and he'd say, he'd get off the phone and he'd say, well, I know they were talking to so-and-so, or I'd hear him say, well, you've been talking to so-and-so, or you've been listening, not talking to, but you've been listening to so-and-so. He said, you gotta just calm down. He said, he said, oh man, they were just like, did you know that blah, 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 and then they're blah, 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 and then, oh, and this is gonna happen, and blah, 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 and he said blah, 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 and then they blah, blah, and he's like, whoa, I know what show you were listening to, or I know, it's like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that he wanted to say is that this has been going on your whole life. You're born into this old system. It's been here for a long time. And you're just, the fact that you now are noticing it doesn't mean that, an avalanche is about to come down on you. It's not like that.
Well, and especially with the new stuff, like, it always seems like, oh, this is the end of the world. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. But it's like, it was the end of the world for people, almost 100 years ago that were awake, where it's like, oh my God, they're doing these world wars. And then they bring in the passport system. We're not going to be able to leave our country and all this stuff. And it's like, now I'm born into this world. And of course we have a passport. Of course I have to do this. And it's like, doesn't even faze me that I'm in this part of the box until you wake up you're like, yeah, that sucks. Just like income tax, it's like, oh, this is only a temporary measure for the war, and now it's permanent. It's like if you were, awake back then, you'd be like, this is the end of the world. They're gonna just steal our money, which is actually one of the biggest issues for sure. But it's like it's just one piece of the puzzle after another. And reading Allan's book, which was so hard. There's so much information per page, and you're just like, you get through like 2 paragraphs, and you're just like, wow, I cannot, like, onion layers like flying off. And then you like put it down, and you have to like, okay, I'll come back to this. It actually took me like a while to like really read it because there's so much in there, and there's so many layers. Even just the words, where you realize that all the words like behave, beehive, like everything is just down to the language level, where you're just like, oh my goodness, this is so wild. But yeah, reading Allan's book was and I should read it again, because honestly I probably forget most of it. It's just the feeling that you get after, where you're just like, the scale, the length of time, and it's a weirdly peaceful feeling, because it's like, it kind of, don't want to say absolves you, but it's like the feeling that you get when you first wake up, where you're like, panic, I have to do something, and I got to do something now. It's like, that kind of washes away. It's like, no, this is how it is. This is how it will always be. Forget the outside world and just like do your thing. And it's like, thank God.
Sometimes people would order the books, and they would want him to write a little something on it. And he often would say something about how you would see more with successive readings of it. And that is so true. And it happens for me. I mean, I know that not too long after he passed away, I thought, well, I've been so busy here, I'm going to read this again. And it's amazing. It's like, well, how many times have I read this? And and I keep it right here by me. I'm always, into it and looking at something. And it's just astonishing to me that you can just keep learning and seeing different things and going, oh, wow, how did I not see that before?
I know. I should buy another book, because I had the book for a while, and then Dad's like, I want that book back. And I was like, okay. So now it's back there. But yeah, I always did love, like you say, poking in once in a while, and just like seeing something totally different.
I tell you what, you've been a good sport and done this, so I'm just going to send you one. You don't have to buy it, and just send me your address, and I'll pop it in the mail for you. That would be my pleasure to do that. But I am going to let you go. It is time for me to shower and DMSO. And hey, and we're not even making any money on this heavy promotion. It's just so great when you find something that really works. I'm like, wow, I can really tell a difference.
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. It's been, such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much.
It's been very nice. And you'll have to do this again in the spring, because we're all now going to want to follow the progress of your garden.
So we'll have
we'll have a spring check-in, and maybe you can send us some pictures. And then in the summertime, when things are going, I have to do a little bit of a move project with mine, because I don't get enough sun. I planted all these watermelon plants, and then I had exactly 2 watermelons this year, and they were both bigger than the one I had last year. And the biggest one was like that big. It's a watermelon, and I'm like, oh, well, hey, look.
Did you eat it? Was it still taste like watermelon?
Yes.
On one bite.
Yeah, I split it open, and I'm like, well, yes, it tastes like a watermelon. But it was so tiny. I think somewhere I took a picture of it, because it was hilarious. It really was about the size of my fist, which is not very big.
Not what you're looking for when you're expecting that big, juicy.
No, I'm not bragging. But I'm seriously not that great of a gardener.
Well, we'll test. We'll do a review, and we can
All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kelly. And do send me your address, and I'll pop that book out for you.
I will. Thank you so much.
All right. And you take care.
You too. Thanks, Melissa. Bye-bye.
Right. Oh, wait a minute. I have to say something to all of you, which is next week is Christmas. Christmas and Thursday is Boxing Day, and I am not going to do a real history. So the next time you hear from me, I believe, will be Real History with Nick of Hayes Reviews, and we are going to be talking about Brave New World Revisited. So that's upcoming on the 2nd of January, 2025. So that's it. All right.